I'll share the presentation.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. It's lovely to have so many people with us already here today. To those who are new to our forum, welcome, welcome. My name is Matt Baird. I am the co-host and founder of the session. I've been running these now for about 4 years. We have a different co-host with us every week. We normally run on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock, but we wanted to make sure Hannah had the chance to get this one in before finishing her assignment with BCU, so we wanted to make sure we're going through all of that today. So welcome to everybody who could join us on this Thursday morning. This whole platform, this whole series is run by my recruitment firm. So I've joined recently with a business called Spirehouse, but I've been self-employed for about 3.5 years now as a recruiter in the social housing space. The funding from that directly keeps this running for free for everybody. So if you are looking for any recruitment support, please do reach out. And to anybody who's involved in the supported housing world, I do run some other forums. So I've helped co-found the Supported Exempt Accommodation Forum. I'm also the co-host of the Supported Housing Networking Group, and I'm co-chair of the board for Spring Housing in Birmingham. So if anybody wants any advice or conversations around those, please do reach out. To those who haven't met Hannah before, it's lovely to have her back. She's been on the Social Housing Roundtable before. And today is going to be presenting some of one of her most recent research projects to do with home encounters. So I'm aware we've got about 55 minutes to try and get through everything today. So I'm going to pass over to Hannah to kickstart today's session. Do feel free during Hannah's presentation to put thoughts, comments, queries in the chat, or feel free, as some people have done, to already make introductions. It's lovely to see so many of us with us. We will then move to a more open Q&A forum with some of the tenants who participated in Hannah's research, showcasing their highlights as well. So without further ado, Hannah, I'm going to pass over to you.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'm just going to share the presentation. Pardon me while I do my whole from the beginning of the slide thing. See if it can actually behave. Come on. Can everyone see that? Can you just give us a thumbs up? Ah, perfect. Right, I'm going to keep this short and brief because I think it's more important to talk about the process as well as the findings, because you can read the report in your own time. So I'll just start a 10-minute timer. Who knows, an academic who might finish a presentation on time. We shall find out. So I'm just going to give you some highlights from the report itself and explain a little bit of how it came about before we have a Q&A. So there's me, Dr Hannah Absalom, ESRC Fellow, and in academic terms, I'm the primary investigator on this research, which is a fancy title in academia. But what's more important is I've been researching with a group of tenants. We started researching together a couple of years ago now, under the auspices of a project called Feeling at Home. And I take what I call a hilltop approach to involvement, which is I will put a shout out about interesting pieces of research, see who's interested. So we've come together and we've fallen apart on different research projects. But this one, the Home Encounters report, was grounded very much in what mattered to tenants. Last year, we did domestic abuse and creating localised domestic abuse plans. This year, we've really looked at what happens in that intimate moment of a home encounter. So I just want to be very clear, this is me facilitating a topic that was chosen by tenants. We've co-designed it. I've gone off and done the research bit. I've done some of the finding stuff, and then we've worked on the report together. So what are home encounters? At its simplest level, it's when a representative of the landlord encounters a tenant in the tenant's home. So simple definition there. If you all remember the Better Social Housing Review, it recommended a series of tenancy audits focused on property. I found a wonderful case study landlord who was willing to let me come and do observations of home visits. So actually ride along, make insane amounts of notes, very hard work to do, and then interview people who are on both sides of the visit as well. I then analysed the findings, and 2 workshops were held with tenant researchers to reality check the findings and identify hot topics that resonated with their experiences. So it's kind of gone through that process. It's gone back to the case study landlords who have really so pleased with the quality of the research, always slightly nervy going back with something that's got some criticisms in it. But I just want to be really clear that I was not surprised by the findings so much in this. And I think it's really important not to just write this off as one case study. landlord. They do resonate wider than that. And we wanted to do this research to draw out the emotionally charged angle of these home visits and really draw those out into, make them visible as all these sector reforms are going on. I have to do a bit of theory because it's not academic research if there's no theory. So you need to sort of get this sort of different perspective. How are we thinking differently about housing services in the home? And basically, it's grounded in a relational perspective, which is a bit of a fancy way of thinking. You're thinking about the interactions between humans and also non-human entities. And I think that's the tricky bit to get your head around. But it's thinking about things like how do historical experiences impact interactions and relationships? Because we have a relationship with the past as well as with people. Psychological processes, we have a relationship with ourselves, with others. You know, it's like all of these different things can be thought of in terms of relationships and processes. And also institutional practices. It's not just about the interaction with the visiting repair operative. It's thinking about the institutional processes that have shaped that particular interaction as well. And I can never move away from the cultural and socio-economic influences when it comes to housing. And I'm very much of the view until we start moving away from everyone must own a home and we start actually celebrating social housing as a desired tenure, because it absolutely should be, these problems are going to keep emerging. But yeah, collaboration, complexity, accepting what can't be controlled. Scary thought, that one. And creating conditions for emergence of better outcomes. So some really challenging ideas in there that are underpinning this report. And I think I just want to introduce this concept of the home as a relational entity, which is in the report as well. So I think we do this a little bit too much in housing. We think of the property as separate to the home. As soon as we've handed the keys over to the tenant, it's the tenant's responsibility to make the home. It's the landlord's responsibility to maintain the property, even though there's a lot of question marks over what maintaining a property looks like from both sides of that. And I think it's important to think about home as a relational entity that is shaped by the experience of services. I always keep saying this, allocations, empty box allocations, that's going to shape your relationship with tenants. Do something about it. Social and emotional relationships is another factor, relationship with the self, and we're back to historical trajectories. I'm really concerned in this context of more and more households finding their way in temporary accommodation. I think it was 154,000 children on a shelter report yesterday in temporary accommodation. That's a lot of housing trauma that's going to be coming into the housing tenure. And also we get back to the issue of cultural perceptions of the tenure. But really, this is a way of rethinking what property is, what home is, and challenge this property-home divide and this divide between the tenant and landlord to reveal new thinking and practice. So some findings. I won't chuck everything in there because you'll have to read the report for all the details on that. There's 11 findings. But yeah, these were some key ones that really came up. Past negative experiences with landlords and other authority figures can lead to anxiety about home visits. So it's really thinking about a culmination of negative experiences, especially maybe for people who might have more interactions with the state than other populations might be used to. There might be an accumulation of negative experiences. The visit can really feel like an invasion of privacy and undermine people's sense that the home is theirs, basically. There were some hot spots. The living room seemed more of a neutral space, but places like bedrooms, I mean, it probably seems like kind of obvious to say it, but why aren't we telling people beforehand that a bedroom is going to be seen as part of the visit? It's awkward for the home visitors. It's awkward for the tenants in the property. And really start thinking about getting rid of visits that don't have a clear purpose, you know, and getting rid of visits that are just too tick boxy. It just feels like an inspection. It feels like an inspection with no purpose because half the time the focus isn't actually on things that tenants want to see happen in the property. So on things that matter to the landlord. So thinking about that. And definitely too many visits. Just this assumption people have got all this time for visits is not right. What was massive as well was this issue of feeling belittled and judged. that was just endemic. If I had to flag a finding, I think that would be the one that was just, whoa, that really is a problem in the home visits. So key recommendations, there's more in the report. So we talk a lot about communication, but no one really clarifies what we mean by communication. And this is why these interactive studies are really important to really get to the heart of what we mean by this. And I don't think you can move away from communication without thinking about transparency. So provide more information about visiting staff and the purpose of the visit. Ensure the purpose of the visit is clear and meaningful for both parties, because tenants will either duck out of visits, say yes and then not be in, not answer your calls, or say yes to a visit they don't want because they're worried about getting evicted. You know, get these visits designed correctly by co-designing the process with tenants. Training and professional development include training on social and emotionally informed practice in the upcoming sector accreditations and professional development programs. These are happening in other domains, probation, social work, education. It's about time, I think, we started doing this more in housing. And what really came out was this idea of a values-based approach. And I put that in challenge to this obsession in the sector of collecting data. And I think, don't get me wrong, researcher, big into data, but without knowing what your values are and without knowing the problems as experienced by tenants and collecting your data based on a purpose-driven approach to understand the problem, it contributes to tenants feeling like test subjects, which is going to be more of an issue in things like the net zero agenda, which is combined with experimental technologies being put into tenants' homes, requiring frequent visits and such like. I think there's some learnings from this home encounter report that can definitely inform the net zero agenda. I saw Julie's on this call. If you want to ask questions for Julie, she spoke at Tenants Hall about this research and tying it into the net zero agenda. So it's already been flagged by tenants. And a big challenge here, an amnesty on tenant-led home improvements, along with developing guides on how they can be done better. Tenants can often be spending a lot of money on making up for repair shortfalls in properties, sometimes getting into debt. And to have those threatened because they're not compliant with a really poor quality repair standard, I think is, you know, it's something that needs to be looked at. So really what we'd like you to do with this report is discuss it. You know, we've done this research together. It's gone through some verification processes with tenants who've been involved from the beginning and the case study landlord. So, you know, I'm happy with the quality of these findings, but every landlord's different, every location's different. Have those conversations with tenants, with the regulator, and see what of these findings resonate with your organisation and work together to implement them to make these home visits something that benefits both parties and not a tick box exercise. And that's it. So thank you very much. My email address is there. I'll ask Matt to distribute it afterwards. I'll stop the sharing and hand over to questions.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for bringing that research project to light. I know it, like as you said, like it's something that's very, has only just kind of come out. So you just want to make sure that the that the information was shared widely. There's a lot of points already made in the chat. I do want to. I know you'd mentioned that Ted, Judith, Mary, and Phil were involved in the piece. I didn't know if any of those would like to come forward and.
Oh yeah, we've also got. I'll just go through the call because we've got a few. We've got Ted as well. Also Paul.
I said Ted, Judith, Mary, and
oh,
Phil.
sorry. Yeah. And there's Paul as well, and there's Julie Hoyle too, and Judith Wren.
Lovely. I didn't know if any of those would like to come forward and share some of their thoughts on what it was like to be a participant in it. Or yes, Phil, after you.
Well, I enjoyed the research, and I was very grateful for Hannah to let me join this. I'm keen involved in customers for Orbit. And actually, I'm a volunteer for Spring Housing in Stratford-on-Avon, so you might like that.
Hi, Phil.
But I'll pass my cross. The one thing that got me, and I think I brought it with Hannah, is off the cuff well-being visits.
Yes, it's in the appendix. I couldn't fit it in the rest of it. I put it in the appendix because it hit onto the legal right to access to the home. So do you want you? I'll hand over to you, Phil, to explain your perspective, and then I can tell people where to find it in the report, if that's okay.
That's okay, yeah. One of my problems is with Orbit, which is very good. They've got a mental health Better Days initiative, which gives you some help. But by signing that up, off the cuff, I had a welfare visit. In some respects, it's good, but in other respects, it's like an invasion of your privacy because you didn't ask that, and you basically want you when you come into the house, maybe with mental health, which I struggle with a bit. The house might be up to a bit of a mess, was the word lived in, but and sometimes you think, oh, are they spying on you? Does that make sense to everybody?
Do you know, just to back up Phil's point there, research is happening in America in public housing, and this idea of feeling like a test subject and being spied on and surveilled is growing, and it's certainly growing in combination with the unreflective use of overpromised technologies as well. But I think what Phil's talking about is, in my view, when the sector can overstep its purpose a little bit. And the intention is good. We know that people who are living in social housing, quite frankly, even kids going to university nowadays, there's a massive mental health crisis. So this very well-intended service did cause a negative reaction. And I think it's also reminding landlords of the legal right that tenants have to quiet enjoyment of the home. And also maybe thinking, what can we do as a landlord that is housing and neighbourhood domain specific? I'd focus more on the housing, to be honest, at the start of this. And where might we be able to make it easier for tenants to access services from professionals who've got expertise we don't have? Because we already have a professional expertise crisis in social housing. We are not a profession, and I know that's hard for some people to hear. But we're not seen as that, and I think we're working towards that. So taking on other responsibilities from other domains, we need to be really cautious about that and be very clear what our professional identity is as people who are social housing practitioners. Because it's not the police, it's not the mental health services, it's not social work. What are we? What is different? And how can we get there? And thank you, Phil. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, that's it. I think that's just my few words today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Phil, I know a quick question before I bring in Becca. So Colin asked, where can we get hold of the research paper, Hannah?
I shall put a link up. It is on the University of Birmingham website. Let me see if I can fish it out while this is going on. I should have got it ready, shouldn't I? But I didn't. But I'll put it on LinkedIn, but I'll drop it in the chat as well.
No worries at all. Becca, are you okay if I bring you in?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just sitting on the floor at the moment because I'm working from home and our neighbour's digging up the front path. It's very noisy. But yeah, it's great to hear their research, Hannah, and really interesting findings. I was just thinking, based on the discussion you just had about the kind of move towards professionalisation in the sector and what's being asked there. And I was just interested in your and other people's thoughts about the focus of the government and the regulator, whether that's the correct approach or whether people think that there's something else that's needed to ensure that people get the best from living in their home and get the best service, I guess, from their landlords. But yeah, interested in your and others' thoughts on that.
I mean, my view is I think as long as it's grounded in public service ethos with a review of what that means. So that's why it was important to get in the report the values-based approach. Housing needs to know what its values is. And I think the source of scope, this is going to get a bit technical now, where housing work is complex. It's in an open system. It's not a locked down service area. It's not a contained environment like a school. It's not a contained process like prisons, social services. You're dealing with open, complex lives. And I think that requires a different way of thinking, which is why I've been leaning more into relational theory and complexity theory and learning a lot from people who are more in the care spaces. Because they're going that way. But I'll be quiet now and hand over to Ted, so I can see Ted's got his hand up.
I think just on that, actually, Becca, I think what's interesting is that the premise seems to have been put towards getting senior management and directors trained and qualified. And it's almost the mirror image, I guess, to something like teaching, where actually it's teachers that need qualifying, not your head teachers. And I know head teachers sometimes have to, but we have people drafted in, same in the care system. It's your care workers and registered managers that need the qualifications, not necessarily your directors of care. It's interesting that housing has gone in the other perspective. And actually, when we're having housing officers who are sometimes people who are stepping into people's homes and they haven't been trained other than maybe by internal teams, internal systems, I don't know. I think it's an interesting one. I'm waiting to see what happens with the consultation, which is still ongoing at the moment, in terms of actually when it's all going to kick in. But the rumour seems to be by the end of Q1 next year. So I guess we'll find out then in terms of how that's all going to play out.
Yeah, because I was just going to say what I found really interesting from your findings, Hannah, is it's about the communication side of things. So it's not to do with the professionalisation necessarily, although there definitely are, as somebody said in the chat about Grenfell, and that is about the kind of compassion and recognising people as people, residents as people, rather than having that antagonistic relationship and seeing people as that complain as a pain. But yeah, just that's why I asked the question.
I think that there is definitely, I think it needs to happen throughout the organisation, and I know we've discussed this as a group of tenants, so I think it does need to be a coherent thread running through the organisation. And professional skills are there. We did draw out that some of the people who were doing the home visits were very skilled at bringing up difficult topics, and I think it's recognising some of that. There's already some professional quality practices to build upon, but yeah, we need to be having more of this open. We don't want to go down the marketisation route, and we need to think about what our defensible knowledge base is in academic terms and how that influences what practice looks like, and we can only decide that together. Sorry, I want to open it up to the.
I'm going to go and bring in Ted. Ted, lovely to have you with us today. Do please join us.
Hi. I'd just like to explain I'm a tenant researcher with Hannah. I've joined quite a while ago. It feels like a complete lifetime. And after the first one, I got hooked, and that was it. I was in. Based on a lot of the things that I've personally gone through with housing associations and my current one in particular. I thought the knowledge and everything would empower me to fight my battles with them, and fingers crossed it's happening bit by bit. That makes sense.
Yeah,
that's all.
No, it certainly does. Thank you. And how did you find kind of going through the research piece with Hannah? How have you found that?
Well, she's very easy to work with. That's one consolation, and she's a nice lady too. That's another one. It's been very addictive, I must admit.
Research is addictive. I'm going to get that put on a t-shirt.
Thank you very much. Ted, Judith, do please join us.
A lot of us feel really stigmatized. One of my neighbours had the great joy of being called a gorilla by contractors working on the exterior of her house. And we've had a lot of examples of this stigma. And I noticed in some of the contractual documents that I've looked at recently, contractors are stigmatizing people who they label as having oh, sorry, my grey cells are not working terribly well. It's been a difficult week because one of my neighbours has been stabbed.
So sorry.
And you know, the stigma around living in social housing where there are real difficulties. You know, where you go into a property and it is full of boxes and things because people have actually moved stuff out of their kitchen to have a new kitchen. And, you know, we get labelled as though there is something wrong with us.
Yeah, that came out so strongly in the finding about feeling small and belittled and judged. It came out in my thesis, it came out in the case study site, it came out in the 2 workshops. And so we've kind of drawn that out as much as we can. And I think with the motives for that, I think are quite complicated. Weirdly enough, I think some of it might be a form of reactance, in that there's a little bit of jealousy of people who are in below market rented properties that shows in a strange way, because we are in the middle of a massive housing crisis that is across tenures. And I know we've discussed as a group as well, it's like, is the stigma actually shifting more towards hidden households who are in temporary accommodation? You know, is now social housing starting to become more of a desirable tenure because people are starting to realize, actually, yeah, we do, paying what we're paying for the private market or home ownership isn't working. So is it creating a new context of stigma? But also issues like the skills shortage in repairs and such. Like we can't get away from the processes that are producing the stigma. And also, as somebody who's got a bit of a specialization in like the psychologization of public policy making, I would urge caution. Look at Fegan's work in the 70s when it comes to sort of stigma. There's nothing new in policy making. How can we engage with getting rid of this feeling of being judged and belittled? There's things that are within the gift of housing to do right now, and there are things that need to change structurally over time. And I think it's having those honest conversations together with tenants, identifying, yeah, we can do this, but you're probably still going to get somebody call you something horrible at some point. We want to know, but also we're going to struggle to find decent repair operatives because there's a skill shortage, and that's going to take a few years to sort out.
Yeah.
Judith, is there anything more you'd like to say on that before bringing
Well,
Phil?
I noticed that Lizzie Spring had got her hand up. I don't know whether that was that she wanted to comment and couldn't find the yellow hand raised.
I've just told her what to do.
Yeah, Liz, do please come in, and then I'll go to Phil.
This episode of the Social Housing Roundtable is sponsored by Alertical. Alertical helps as many people as possible feel safe, connected and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Calls, an easier, simpler and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare and smoke alarms. Alertical works with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023 won Housing Supplier of the Year. I'm delighted to have them as our sponsor of the Social Housing Roundtable throughout 2024.
Oh, thank you. I wrote it down in the chat because I'm hopeless on these Zoom calls, as you know.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm interested about clientizing tenants, about seeing us as things to be encountered and to be visited, and people coming into our homes. I loathe it. I absolutely hate my landlord staff coming into my home. But parallel to that, I'm really interested, and you'll know this, Hannah, because we've had loads of conversations about it over the years, about the huge resource of trained, qualified practitioners within the tenant body, like myself. I mean, I worked as a psychiatric social worker for nearly 40 years in different roles. In the house I live in, there are 7 flats in which there's me, a retired social worker, we have a nurse, several office managers, my son who works in data analysis at a very, very high level, London University. And we could be drawn upon to train new incoming unskilled grassroots housing workers. And they could be a pool of highly skilled, trained, qualified, very experienced tenants, both those like myself who've managed voluntary sector agencies for years. Some of us are retired, some are still working. rather than us just being seen as little people to visit at the whim of the landlord. My landlord recently put a survey out asking if we'd like to have what somebody else referred to as well-being visits, and that we were all supposed to go. She said she was a new worker. We have a very, very high turnover of workers, which adds to the problem of home visiting because it's strangers coming into strangers' homes. Because because 2/3 of tenants are well over 50, and half of that 2/3 are well over 70. We tend to be 2 or 3 times older than the new incoming staff nowadays. And they come in very much on the contemporary housing model of thinking we're all vulnerable and we all need to be supported.
Yep.
In fact, we're not, because when we took our tenancies, half the population rented from councils and then housing associations, and we're just the people that live in an area.
Yeah.
All that bundled together, when a 23-year-old comes into my age 70s home, tilts her head, waves a lanyard at me as an introduction rather than holding out a hand to shake and giving a name, and then walks in, sits down without being invited, usually in my chair because it's the most comfortable one, and then begins to fire questions about what my sexuality and gender identification are because she hasn't got it on the bit of paper in front of her. It is my professional persona comes rising back up to the fore, even though I've retired. And I want to actually sit down and teach her how to behave, starting off with a letter or an email asking if I want to be visited, and then a relaxed, calm response saying, oh, fine, you don't.
Do you know,
and then going from there. And just one more thing, going back to the contractors. I had one who came around last year who came in to fix a broken fan in my bathroom, was standing on a ladder in my bathroom, complaining bitterly about how badly wired in this little machine was. And he said that he had a similar one in his flat and that he lived fairly near me. I said, oh, do you rent from a housing association? It was a lad in his mid-20s. And he turned around and looked at me from his ladder, and I'm very small. He looked at me from down from his ladder and said, no, I pay for my flat. I said, I've paid over £250,000 out in rent so far in my life, and will carry on paying until I die. So it'll be probably about 600 grand by then at the rates rent's going up in 30 years' time. And he gave me a hugely theatrical and dramatic sneer, and then turned his back and carried on this thing. If he'd been anybody else, and not forced on me by my landlord, I would have asked him very politely to get out of my house.
I think that's a very powerful point you make, and we can never capture all of the discussion in the reports that we do, but we did actually talk about the generational difference that's happening in housing. When it comes to younger people, a bit of a sense of that actually they've been so poorly treated by the housing systems.
Do you know what it is?
You know, they're in houses of multiple occupation, they're not able to put down roots, they're spending so much of their income on rent. And also
just to interrupt very briefly, I pay 90% of my pension goes on rent. Many of us are paying 2, 3.
Oh no, I just think we generally, and I put myself in this, I described this slightly, I don't mean to dismiss younger people, but in my mind I'd nickname them Thatcher's grandchildren. I'm a child of Thatcher.
What a terrible idea.
So I'm a child of Thatcher, you know, born in the 80s, but I knew that history of collectivism, and I feel like we've lost the language of collectivism, and this is why these relational type studies are really important. And from my perspective, I've got a doctorate, but my background is housing. I feel it's a real privilege. I've got the capacity to articulate what matters and bring this forward. But this is very much a collaborative piece of work. But I think when it comes back to empathy and understanding, I fully understand in that moment where you have somebody being so rude to you in your home and not wanting them there, that is a moment that requires empathy and understanding. But I think
it requires manners.
And I think it needs to inform the training of the people going into your home, so it doesn't happen again. Go on. Sorry, so we can hand over.
Don't be at all. I think it's really important Lizzie got to raise that, but I'm very, very grateful we have. And I can see that Claire has put in the chat there. This report is brilliant